Well, good morning. Good morning. Am I on? Good, good. I've never been mic'd up like this, so I may use my hands a lot more than normal. I'm used to holding the mic. But thank you all for having me. I am a counselor by training, Christian by faith, but before any of that, I'm black, born black, African American, or if you pull up my birth certificate, Negro. And so when Philip asked me to, or invited me for this opportunity and said, I'm encouraged to talk about my faith, I was like, yes, finally. I'm never invited to speak about my work and be able to talk about my faith and just how my faith in my family has led me to this place in Charleston where I find myself in the midst of working towards social justice and racial equity. And I was just talking to the two gentlemen behind me a few minutes ago and just thinking about here in Charleston, I don't know if you all know how unique this work of working towards social justice is in this community. I talked to my colleagues all across the country, and this is really something special. Charleston has something really special. Like I said, I've never been asked to talk about faith, social justice, working with individuals who have needs. And so I just want you all to know that and to hold on to that and to keep doing what you're doing, because Charleston is definitely, in my opinion, and from what I've seen working in this area, is truly unique. So keep doing that. So about, I won't say how long ago, in the early days of my career, I responded to an employment ad, and it said, wanted social worker to work with homeless families and the faith community. And I was like, what is that? I don't understand that, because that was during the days when, church and state, totally separate, HUD and church, housing, homelessness, that was not a thing back then. So I'm dating myself. So this was around 1992. And I thought about it, I'm like, that sounds really unique. So I'm just gonna apply and see what happens. So I applied for the position. I'm 24 years old at the time. So I applied for the position and found out that there was this radical minister, new to Savannah, long ponytail, wore jeans with holes in them, and somebody let him be the executive director of a homeless shelter, and he decided to start this program where he would pair congregations with homeless families. So the congregation would sponsor the house, so either they would give like a rector or a house that someone had, or they would pay the rent for a house. And my job was gonna be to screen and work with the family. So I would screen the homeless family that was coming out of a shelter, and I would work with them until they got, for up to 2 years, until they got to the point where they could either take over the rent or they could find a suitable home for themselves and live independently. So this crazy minister hired me, 24 years old, thinking I got a brand new college degree that I haven't used yet. So I feel like I'm licensed to change the world. And this ponytail minister was crazy enough to say, sure, go do it. And so they had 3 apartments when I was hired. And within 2 years, we had recruited enough congregations to house 24 families. And not just the housing piece that was so remarkable, it was the interaction with the faith community. It was that people who would never, ever cross paths were able to have dinners together. They were able to, they were invited to these churches. Many of them were invited to churches, denominations they'd never been to, never, worshiping in ways they never had before, but just experiencing the love, and I feel sometimes, in Savannah, we say I love church, but I don't always like church people. So church people, sometimes we can alienate those who are so different from us. But this particular program put everyone on an even playing field. It just gave the faith community a really tangible way to live out their faith. And it gave the homeless families an opportunity to see what God's love looks like. So that may sound like it was kind of the beginning of my work in social justice, but it really is sort of the middle. So Philip said I had 30 minutes. I promise I won't talk that long. But I do want to, my beginning really starts a lot earlier. So if you'll indulge me, I'll take you all the way back to really the beginning. So sort of how did I get here? And I think the title, so I was born this way. I really was just born. My parents both worked very long and hard in the civil rights movement in Savannah. My father was one of 19 high schoolers who was handpicked by the NAACP in Savannah to integrate the high schools. My mother, by the time she was 18, she'd been arrested 3 times for sitting and peacefully protesting to be served in restaurants. So when I say I was just born, I literally was just born. I was born into that. Those were my parents. And then they got married. After my father integrated the schools, he then went on to Vietnam. So he left a community that hated him, and then he went on to a war that hated him and came back to a country that hated him. So just sit with that for a minute. But when my mother found out that she was pregnant with me, she was about 2 months pregnant. My father was in Vietnam, and Dr. King, a couple of days later, was then assassinated. So sit with that for a minute. So just thinking about my parents and the conversation that I entered 7 months later, when the country is still mourning the death of the most visible and prominent civil rights leader, I really have to say I think I was just born this way. Like I remember, I have 2 adult children, and when I was carrying both of them, and they're totally different, but when I was carrying both of them, they had their own personalities in here, and when as they grew as young adults and adults, that personality that I felt for those 9 months is not very different from how they are today. So I really feel like a lot of the trajectory of my parents' life that, took place because of what happened during the civil rights movement, and the fact that during my nurturing moments, my parents and particularly my mother was going through really just some hard stuff. So, just the trauma of that, I think, and then being raised in a family with a foundation of love. So I'll say that those things definitely influenced, but I want to go even further back. So my grandmother, not further back than my birth, but my grandmother, she found a little church in Savannah on a dirt road in a very rural community when my mother and her sisters were very young. And that became our family church for 3 generations, actually. And I think my brother still attends as a visitor. And it was a very small church. It was very cold in the winter and extremely hot in the summer. It was one of those small churches. We had about 5 families, maybe, that made up this church. And luckily, my pastor had 13 children, and they were musical, so they were the choir. So we had that part taken care of. But it was such a small church that you really had nowhere to hide. So, we all had to, at some point or another, take on leadership roles. And that's where, and Sunday school was extremely intimate. If you know your Bible verses, everybody knew it, because there were only like 10 of us in, this group, and then we had the younger kids. But that is where I learned to feed the hungry. That's where I learned to visit the sick. My grandmother was a missionary, and after church, it was no going straight home. There was the visit to the hospital, because people needed communion, and people needed prayer. And she carried her tambourine and her Bible in a bag because people needed songs. So this is, and I'm always like, oh, can't we just go home? I'm so hungry, I want to eat. But, going from church to serve, to me it was going from church to service. And then it was going home. And so that is what was woven into my life. One of the songs that my grandmother, she sang a lot of songs, but one of the songs that she sang to us that we learned in Sunday school, but she would sing to us before we went to bed, was Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. And I just remember always feeling like Jesus loved all of us. But we don't all love all of us. But she sang that to us every night before we went to bed, I think as a reminder for us as little black children that we were loved also. That she needed to let us know, regardless of what the world tells you, regardless of what you see on television, regardless of how people treat you, Jesus loves all of us. And then, too, we were taught to love everyone else. But I really believe that it was a reminder to us. And in our family, particularly with my father, we could not even use the word hate. Like hate, you couldn't say, I hate you, or I hate this. No, we couldn't say hate. You could dislike actions, but you could not hate people. And I want to go back to my father and my mother's teen years. They had a lot of reasons that they could have used as excuses to hate. My father would talk more openly about Vietnam than he would about integrating the schools. He said to me, I asked him as an adult, I know more about your time in Vietnam than I know about, how things went when you were doing that period of integration. And he said, because it hurts too bad. And I just remind you of that because there's a lot of scars. When you're interacting with people, particularly people of color and African Americans who have endured this, there's a lot of pain. But I commend my parents for continuing to keep love on the forefront and the love of Jesus on the forefront of my siblings and my minds. So why do I do this work? Philip said I can kind of talk about the work that I do and also sort of why I do that as it relates to my faith and my family. So injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We all know that quote by Dr. King. And my father had a poster of Dr. King in his office with that quote, and I had seen it, several times. And one day I was visiting his office, and I ran by the poster, and I dropped in his office, and I was 10 years old, and I'm like, exactly what does that mean? A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now, that turned into an hour. Or at 10, it felt like a lifetime of a life lesson about Dr. King and justice. But I later realized that he had that hanging in his office, not simply for his clients to see and to be, but it was a reminder for him to keep fighting. He spent way more time in his office than he did at home. So that was a reminder, I believe, for him to keep fighting. So my father would say that he was raised duct tape poor. Now, duct tape poor meant that his shoes and often his pants were held together with duct tape because he was literally that poor. My mother said she was poor, but he said, no, you weren't poor because you had 3 pairs of shoes. He had a pair of shoes. There were no church shoes. My mother had church shoes, school shoes, and play shoes, which were last year's church shoes. So, but my father was like, you were not poor. You didn't have to tape your shoes together. So he won that argument. But after he integrated the schools, his senior year, first day of school, white teacher in a class full of just a few African American or Negro children at that time, did what she does every year, asked the kids, What would you like to be when you grow up? And so, of course, most of the white children proclaimed their right to be whatever they wanted to be and said all the things that they wanted to be. And when she got to my father and he said, "I want to be a lawyer," and she laughed with him with so much pity as she explained to him that he was too black and too poor to be a lawyer. So she was wrong, and she probably became his single source of inspiration. He might have just been bluffing. He might have just wanted to sound smart. But because of what she said, he decided, I am going to be a lawyer. And I will say he was one of the best. And I thank her for her inspiration. She sucked as a teacher, but I thank her for inspiring him and opening some opportunities for me. So I do this work because it's still necessary. We talk about, my father's experience in integrating the schools and how traumatic that was, and our children are still being traumatized in public school today. And I will say that statistically more so since integration than pre-integration. Pre-integration, African and black children were taught by black teachers in black schools and were taken care of emotionally and educationally. And these teachers, if you think about blacks who were educated, that had very advanced degrees but could not become doctors and lawyers and professors, they were teachers. So these teachers in these black schools were highly educated and were providing a great education for these students. And then they're thrust into a school, 19 children in an entire high school of white teachers and white students who feared and or hated them. That's hard. Feared and or hated them. Did not integrate the teachers. Did not bring the black loving and caring and understanding this population teachers. They thrust them into this school of people who feared and or hated them. And today, this work is still necessary. So I spent the better part of 20 years of my career trying to identify and secure housing and healthcare, employment, substance abuse treatment, all of these things for homeless men, women, and children, the vast majority of whom were children, men, and women of color. And, homelessness is ground zero for poverty. It is rock bottom. Yet, when we would pull our annual statistics, there is still a difference between the success of obtaining employment, jobs, access to health care when it comes to white homeless individuals versus homeless individuals with color. And so you think, how can that be? Nobody has anything. They're all at ground zero because race still plays a factor in their outcomes. And that's when true racial equity is achieved, when race no longer is a factor in outcomes. So kind of like working with homelessness, it kind of, social justice seems like an insurmountable task, but it's not. And again, you guys are doing a great job in Charleston. We guys are doing a great job in Charleston. I've been here 3 years. I'm still working on my inclusion language. But I want to tell you some things about just looking at the disparities. So when we look at disparities in this country, in education, they call it the achievement gap, when students of color have lower outcomes than white students. In healthcare, it's called healthcare disparities. That's where different health rates and death rates from some groups suffer more than other groups. People of color have worse outcomes. When we look at the rate that even children are placed in foster care, they call that disproportionality. And in law enforcement, disproportionate minority contact refers to the fact that people of color tend to have more contact, and specifically negative contact, with law enforcement than their white counterparts. So when you think about all of that, it's no wonder we can't come to on one page with racism because we're calling it something different everywhere. So you're calling it something in education, we're calling it something in healthcare. We're not all realizing that we're all still talking about racism. So in the, and that's not to blame any one system because really every system, you can't pull stats from any system that doesn't show that people of color have worse outcomes than their white counterparts. And so that's not to blame any one system, but to look at the systems as a whole. So part of the work that I do is, it's been my pleasure to introduce the Racial Equity Institute to Charleston. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later, but in the Racial Equity Institute, we look at, we use an example of fish versus the lake. So if you were walking by your favorite lake where you take a walk every day after work and just clear your head, and you walk by and there's a dead fish, maybe even two, that's belly up on the bank of the lake, you'll probably walk by and, even if you even think about it, you may say, oh, the sick fish must have gotten sick. Fish ate something bad. Fish, he died. And keep going. If you go back the next day and there are hundreds of fish just belly up in the lake and on the banks of the lake, you might think, what's wrong with this lake, right? What is going on with this water that all these fish are dying? And so we tend to, in ministry and in human services, we tend to try to fix the fish. Because it's easier. It's easier to feed someone, give them a coat, give them a blanket, make sure somebody has an after-school program. You can see that. But actually addressing the lake, the system that is feeding the fish, the education system, the law enforcement system, the healthcare system, that's kind of hard. You think, no, I think I'll just give them a hot dog. I can see that. I can see that I can do that. I can do that. So with the Racial Equity Institute, we try to look at the disparities and how all of our systems are connected. And it does seem insurmountable, but Rome was not built in a day. So we can do this. It's going to take some time. And it's going to take that collective mindset. It's going to take that collaborative effort. It's going to take the faith community. It's going to take the faith community. I've heard the history this morning of how instrumental the faith community has been in the creation and the establishment and the sustainability of things that weren't so great. So if the faith community can do that, we can certainly dismantle these things. So what can we do with such a big problem? But we can do some things. So I'm just going to give you an example of a couple of things. And in this conference, from now on, I'll be saying, what can we do? We can come here. We can come. So have it every year now, because I'm going to be talking about it a lot. So don't let this be the last year. So one of the things I was introduced to last year was transformation table. Has anyone attended a transformation table? Good, so we all can register. So the transformation table it brings together local chefs and community members that host a very small 10-person intimate dinner in your home. And I saw in the video where someone said we want to change the way our tables look. So this is what we're talking about. A 10-person, you invite 10 people, but they're invited and they're all from different countries or represent different cultures. And the point of it, and I'm going to quote Tina Singleton, who is the founder and CEO of that. So what she says is, these dinners are not only an opportunity for people of different backgrounds to connect with people they might not otherwise have an opportunity to meet, but more importantly, it is an opportunity for people to come together, bear witness to each other's humanity, to see each other and hear each other's stories. So when you actually know someone that's Black, you can't believe stereotypes about Blacks. If you know someone who's from India, you don't believe. If you've actually sat down and heard their story, and you've met and really fellowshipped with someone and people from different culture, it makes it a lot harder for someone to convince you that all are this way. And so the transformation table for me, and when I attended, I can't even tell you, there were at least 8 different countries represented, and the chef is generally from or has a background from a different country, and the food is then cooked from that country, and there's a whole explanation about how these are family recipes and what this means to the culture. So it definitely culturally enlightens you, but it gives you an opportunity to talk to people who are different. And I'll say that Transformation Table was launched in 2016, and they have already hosted dinners and chefs with cooks from 14 countries. I don't know people from 14 different countries, so I feel like I need some more Transformation Table, but it really opened my eyes to some things. So I say that as a suggestion of something that we can do, or that you can do, to change the way your table looks. In 2017, the YWCA, along with 6 other nonprofits, launched the Racial Equity Institute. And the Racial Equity Institute is out of North Carolina, but they're nationally recognized for helping communities address institutional racism. That's the lake. Institutional racism, not the fish, looking at the institutions. And many people know YWCA. We've been in this community for 111 years, but when we moved from downtown, everybody said, oh, YWCA went away. Well, we didn't go away. We just moved, and we continue to do services, but primarily for a long time, the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration had been our programming. It had been what we coordinated and what we presented to the community. And when I started about 3 years ago, I really looked at our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. And so I looked at what the celebration was doing and how it aligned with our mission. And being raised as, someone who definitely, my family, Dr. King was a staple of conversation in our home, and the celebration is fantastic. If you haven't done the breakfast or the parade or the poetry slam or any of the things that we do during the 10 days, I encourage you to come out in 2020. But it's a fantastic celebration, but I did not feel that it was addressing the elimination of racism. I felt like it was addressing diversity, because it does. It is what diversity looks like and feels like. The parade, the breakfast, it's all fantastic. And it is truly a time where the community comes out and we're very diverse. So it definitely does that. But the elimination of racism piece, this thing kept nagging at me that we weren't doing that. And so I got introduced to the Racial Equity Institute. I got invited. Teach for America made an opportunity for me to attend one in, I believe it was North Carolina. And I'm driving to this training. I guess it was 3 hours away or so. And the whole time I'm open-minded, but I'm also thinking, I've been Black all my life. What are they going to teach me? And this going to take them 2 days to teach me how to be Black in America? I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. I'm looking for something. I'm searching at this point for something that's going to be transformational for the YWCA and the Charleston community. So they shut me up really quickly. Like, by lunchtime, I was blown away, first of all, by the truth of the history. A lot of what we've heard today, I heard a lot more today than I heard. From the faith perspective, was fantastic today so far, but a lot of what, and I watched people's faces, and everyone, Black and white, Latino, were looking like did that happen? And people were on their phones, like, Googling, like, did that really happen like that? It did. The intentionality, the Racial Equity Institute exposes the intentionality of racism in this country and how it was created simply to create a hierarchy. Nothing more. No one's any better than anyone. There are so many ridiculous statistics when you look at even medical professionals. There was a research done recently, within the last couple of years. I want to say it was done in 2017, where medical students were actually questioned on things like, are black people's skin tougher than white people's skin? Do black people heal faster? Do they bleed less? And these professionals who are going to be our physicians got the answers wrong. They got them wrong in this century. So the fact that this institution of hierarchy and of difference has sustained itself for so long. So those kind of things is what really got my attention. And I said, I've got to find a way to bring this to Charleston. And so in January 2017, during MLK celebration, because it made sense to me, it's primarily what we do, it's when the community is paying attention to us. A full class is 40 people. So I said, great. So every year we'll do racial equity during MLK. So we'll celebrate and then we'll slide a little real meat, on the bones as well. You can trick them sometimes. They celebrate and then you teach them. So we were going to do that, and we figured we'll get at least 40 people that'll register for this training, and we did. 40 people showed up. We were very intentional about the 40 people because we wanted to make sure that these were people that could make decisions, that could actually send others to training, or whose word of mouth would mean something in this community. So we got 40 people. January was around 17th or so during MLK week. And we usually close 2 or 3 days after MLK because my staff is tired and we've had a lot going on. When we came back to work on that Monday, our mailbox was full with people first thanking us for inviting them, 2, irate that they weren't invited, and 3, how do I get into the next one? And I was like, there is no next, the next one is next year. Like, that was my mindset. But the phones and the emails wouldn't stop. So I said, you know what? Give the people what they want. They want another training, so we did another one in March. We did another one, I think, in the summer. By the end of the year, we had literally accidentally done 5. Then the next year, we said, well, let's schedule 6, just let's go ahead and schedule them, let people know when they are, and we'll see what happens. Totally filled up. We ended up having 2 special ones because an organization wanted one just for their people, and another organization, so we're like, okay, fine. So now we have 8 planned. If 2019 goes the way it's been going, we're probably going to be close to having them monthly. And I'll say that in 2 years, thinking that we were going to do 40 a year, in 2 years, we've had over 14 classes, and we've had more than 330 participants. So that's because the people asked for it. That is literally because people have asked for it and demanded it. And I am so just thankful that Charleston, because, when I got here, it was post Emanuel 9, and I was in Savannah during the tragedy. Had no idea I would ever be coming to Charleston. I was literally fine where I was. But there was something about the way Savannah responded to that tragedy, and I watched how the world responded to the way Charleston responded. And so I think that the world is watching Charleston. Charleston has a very long history. We're a very old city. But also, the way Charleston responded to that tragedy, the world is watching us. And I think that if we do it and continue to do what we're doing and do it right, we can speak to the entire country or world at the way we can address social justice. So we certainly showed people how you can forgive in the face of unspeakable tragedy. So I really believe that that having hosted those 330 plus individuals says that we can do this and we can get people the foundation. Racial Equity Institute does not take the place of anything that all of these wonderful organizations, Charleston Forum, Sophia Institute, we're all doing great things, and we actually work collaboratively to refer people, because what the Racial Equity Institute does, it gives you that basic foundation, that common language, that courage to say and to address things that you see that are unjust. So it just gives you a baseline. Then you can go on and continue doing the other things. Meeting Street Academy, Meeting Street Schools is one of our big partners, because someone came and then that person had told everyone else, you've got to do this. And now they have decided that every teacher, over the course of these next few years, every teacher will receive this training. And it has actually changed the way they deal with children in their classroom. It's changed the way they do their team meetings. So it sets a foundation. So like I said, we've done these 14 or so sessions. 44% of our participants, I'm a social worker, I have to do statistics. 44% of our participants have come from nonprofit, 36 from education, and I underline here, not enough from our faith community. So, because again, I think that we are the faith community, we are the foundation, and we represent all of this. Now, I'm not saying that none of the nonprofit leaders and the educational leaders don't come from a faith home or have a faith leadership role, but I mean folks who are simply representing the faith community. So I encourage you to look into the Racial Equity Institute as an opportunity for your congregation to have a common language and set sort of some common standards for how you'll address institutional racism. So these are just some examples of how you can continue the conversation, this conference for sure. And then, I think the first step is just to join the conversation. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It doesn't feel, it's not a touchy-feely subject. It doesn't feel good. A lot of the things we heard this morning, I'm sure they weren't easy to say, so they may not be easy to hear, but it's necessary. You can't address it if you don't know the truth. So we have to learn the truth about the racial disparities and, more specifically, the historical context of separation in this country, because I truly believe that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you so much.